Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene per year, and I am here alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania. Rania, thanks so much for, I don't know why I said thanks so much for being with us. Very glad, very happy to be back alongside you. Sorry, I just got a little over exuberant there. Nonetheless, happy to be here with you.
It's good to be on with you, Eugene. I love your colors today.
Oh,
It's
thank
like a
you. I
nice,
appreciate that. Sort of a
it looks good
spring.
against the dark backdrop too. Like it's a nice contrast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A little spring yellow as we get in here to late May, as it were. The flowers are blooming. The spring showers are out. So I wanted to reflect that in terms of how we look today. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Very happy to be back here with all of our viewers. Shout out to you. Thanks for joining us once again. For those who are watching on YouTube here, the show, feel free to take this time now to hit subscribe and also to hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you subscribe to. And we have a lot of great content coming out here from Breakthrough News, including dispatches with Rania. So you definitely want to make sure, if you are following us on YouTube, that you are able to get those alerts right away. Also want to shout out everybody who is watching us on Free Speech TV. Good to have you here with us as well. And big shout out to all the team there at Free Speech TV for making it possible for us to appear on your screen as we move forward. Rania, are there other things you might like our viewers to know before we get started here today?
Yes, there are. I would like to remind everybody who's watching that first and foremost, you got to smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. More importantly, if you support independent media at this crucial time, when we're witnessing a live stream genocide and just so many shifts in the global order, and we're bringing it to you from a non-corporate anti-war machine perspective, you can actually help be a part of it by supporting Breakthrough News. You can become a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where for as little as $5 a month, you can support, well, not just support independent media, but you can also access exclusive content and some pretty cool merch. You can go check it out there, patreon.com/Breakthrough News. Eugene got his mug ready. One of the exclusive pieces of merch you can access is that cool BT mug, as well as other fun stuff. But it's really, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to support independent media like Breakthrough News right now, when just 5 companies in the world own 90% of the media that people consume. And as a result, we're just constantly surrounded with a tsunami of disinformation. So we're here to try to break through that. So become a part of the Breakthrough News team, basically, by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News.
Yes, we would love to have you as a part of our team, however you want to call it, our family, our collective, however you want to name it. And shout out to everyone, of course, who's already a patron. All of your support is greatly, greatly appreciated and has done so much for us. And shout out to everyone who's made any sort of contribution in addition to donating, liking, sharing, spreading the word. Also absolutely crucial for us as well. So shout out to you. Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe if you were there on YouTube and hit the alert button. But we are just about ready to get off the ground here. As always, we got a great show for you going all around the world. We want to start here with some of the geopolitical intersections flowing from the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by the musician and journalist Low Key. Low Key, as always, thanks so much for being on with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy coming on the show. Thanks.
Well, we really enjoy having you here. And I wanted to start with an issue that's been a big one in sort of the mainstream media. And I know that you have also been sort of caught in the intersections of this. And that is this idea that the online conversation, especially social media around the war in Gaza, is somehow being driven by Russia or China or whoever it may be, that there's sort of fake inflation of accounts and so on and so forth. So I wanted to ask you, about that specifically. I mean, what do you think about it? And what's behind, or who's behind these sorts of accusations that are really flying all around the mainstream media?
Essentially, there is a form of shadow war playing out whereby Israel is very keenly aware that Iran is growing closer to China and Russia by the day. And that is really illustrated clearly in the Iranian Operation al-Wa'd al-Sadiq, the truthful promise, the operation striking Israel with ballistic missiles and drones in an unprecedented way. It actually took place using the missile guiding systems from both Russia and China. Beidou is a Chinese company and GLONASS is a Russian company. They were used to fulfill that. So therefore, it couldn't have taken place without a green light, most likely from either China or Russia. When we look at actually the behavior of Russia vis-a-vis Gaza is quite interesting, because the Israelis were arming with small arms, the Azov battalion in Ukraine, as was covered by Asa Winstanley in the Electronic Intifada. And on the other side of that, Russia then granted, according to Hamas, licenses for the production of Kalashnikov bullets in Gaza. Now, this greatly offended the Israelis. On the other side, also Hamas, figures from Hamas stated that in their communications with the Russians said they would teach the Tufan al-Aqsa operation on October 7th in their military schools within 24 hours of it happening. These are the conversations that supposedly took place. This greatly offended the Israelis. On the Chinese side of things, it's important to remember that China has the comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran that will invest 400 billion in Iran over the next 2 decades or so. China has been operating what Israel seems to perceive as a form of sanction, whereby it is not exporting the dual-use civil military exports to Israel since October 7th. What you've also seen, China refused to condemn Hamas. You've also seen during that time Chinese control of the Israeli port of Haifa, which was built with Chinese money, fall to under 70%. And you have a fall by 70% because the Indian billionaire that was competing with China has been given far more access to it. But also, quite importantly, China has taken the steps to ban its workers from filling the void left by the cancelling of Palestinian permits within Israel, because Israel needed to fill that gap in some way. You have even alone 60,000 Palestinian construction workers in Israel who have not been able to work there since October 7th. So Israel thought they could turn to China, but quite the opposite happened. China said they would not be giving that the workers would not go to work in occupied Palestine. But now on this issue of information, you've of course seen the much promoted war against TikTok, which has been led by key Israel lobby groups and, of course, the military-industrial complex puppets within the US government. And, of course, it's so ridiculous because actually TikTok's data, which is procured in the United States, goes directly to Oracle, which is a company that is headed by Larry Ellison, who is the largest donor to the Friends of the IDF in the history of the charity, and such a close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. He even offered him the directorship of the company. So TikTok is certainly not China manipulating the perceptions of young people to have an aversion to industrial scale killing that Israel is carrying out in Gaza. But where it comes to the UK and regarding me, the Daily Telegraph, a well-known right-wing newspaper, has published what is the most outlandish conspiracy theory that I have ever had aimed at me before. And it is that Russia and China are working to boost my Twitter account and the accounts of others to spread a quote-unquote pro-Hamas narrative in Britain. Now, the investigations for this piece by the Daily Telegraph were carried out by a company called Cyabra, which is an Israeli social threat intelligence company. Of course, the Daily Telegraph does not identify it as a social threat intelligence company. However, that company claims to have studied my Twitter account and found supposedly that 11% of the accounts which quote unquote engage with mine are fake accounts. Now, numerous studies have found that the average fake follow account on large Twitter accounts is around 42%. Even Elon Musk's was around that kind of level. So clearly it's below average. And they're not even saying these are people that follow me. They're saying these are people that engage with my account. Now, Cyabra, it's important to note, 3 of its founders are veterans of the Israeli Occupation Forces cyber units. At least 40 of the firm's employees are reserves in the Israeli military who were called up to fight in Gaza. Now, Cyabra is in fact so close to the Israeli occupation forces that the CEO, Dan Brahmi, a former combat instructor for the Israeli military, gave a talk recently with the office of the Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson unit titled On Alert with the IDF. So what's quite clear is that Israel is in different ways through its proxies militating against Russia and China by taking advantage of the existing war propaganda which exists within Western societies to try and extricate itself from the spotlight when it comes to the crimes in Gaza.
It really is incredible. And there's another aspect of this kind of irritation by the ruling establishment about the change in public opinion. And there was this report that was recently put out by a man called Lord Walney. You can explain what that is. When it comes, I don't know why they're still lords. Unless is Lord his first name, or is he an actual lord? I don't know. But this is a very serious report because it was a report that describes you as an apologist for terrorism, and then also calls for Palestine Action to be banned. It also calls for a group called Just Stop Oil to be banned. These are apparently very bad organizations that we should all fear. Can you explain to me what's going on there? And I mean, and one of the pinnacles of what we're supposed to believe is some free and democratic place.
So Jonathan Woodcock is his real name, but he was selected to be a lord in the Houses of Lords. In Britain, you have over 300 individuals who collect a daily wage and are not elected, and it's a lifetime position. So that was quite a comfortable position. Yeah, it was a comfortable position for him to be placed in. But I think an interesting part of the trajectory between the metamorphosis from Jonathan Woodcock to Lord Walney is that when he was an MP, he was accused of sexual harassment by an 18-year-old employee of his. Now, a way for him to escape investigation about that within the Labour Party was to resign from the Labour Party, and then Boris Johnson, the leader of the Conservative Party, selected him to be a Lord. Now, once he became a Lord, he was tasked with being the quote-unquote independent advisor to the government on extremism, political violence and disruption. Now, he has gathered together this 100,000-word report, which has had involvement that we know about and will make clear soon of fully fledged Israel lobbyists. But he himself was actually the head of the Labour Friends of Israel. He's accepted funding from Israel lobby groups even as recently as January. He traveled to Palestine on a trip funded by the Israeli government, where he planted trees with Israel's largest settlement building organization, the JNF. And most importantly, especially when it comes to the Palestine Action issue, is that he is the chair of something called the Defense Purpose Coalition, which is a lobby group where a paying client of that lobby group is Leonardo, one of the key arms companies which is involved in arming Israel in its war against Palestinian life. And of course, Leonardo is one of the targets of the direct action group Palestine Action. Now, to be clear, Palestine Action has achieved what are, relatively speaking, miracles in this country. They have shut down permanently 3 sites for Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms company in the world. But in this country, they've shut them down permanently, not shut them down temporarily. They've shut them down so they are vacated. They've forced 2 UK subsidiaries of Elbit Systems to be sold. They have forced the British Ministry of Defence to cancel £280 million worth of contracts with Elbit Systems. They forced numerous other companies that were dealing with Elbit Systems to cancel their contracts with them through direct action. What Wolney is attempting to do is to have a more comprehensive ban on the idea and the tactic of direct action completely. Now, where he mentions me within the report is he picks out lyrics from my song Terrorist and from my song Long Live Palestine, and he comes to the conclusion that not only are the lyrics in Long Live Palestine examples of anti-Semitism, but in the song Terrorist, it's a form of apologism for terrorism. So this is a smear job, and it's really a desperate attempt for the captured British establishment that works lock in step with the Israel lobby and the Zionist entity to try and snatch back some ground where really interesting and positive achievements have been seen in this last period during the war on Gaza in this country. So really they're trying to establish hegemony over this public space in that way. We will not stop. He will not stop Palestine Action, even if they are designated as an extremist organization, as he said, just below a terrorist organization. We have already been willing to go to prison, and we will go to prison if that is what has to happen. We do not fear him, and we don't fear Israel. And so it's important that the people that are reading this report understand that actually we are being driven by love for other human beings and our aversion to industrial scale killing.
No, I think that's a critically important point to raise there, and very, very interesting background on all these different points. As always, we really appreciate you coming on low key and helping us sort through all the background of all these various reports that we see. And we'll look forward to continue to promote your work moving forward. And thanks so much again for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, low key, I could just listen. He's so good at just breaking these like really complex things down into very specific, granular like details, but ones that you can follow. So I always really appreciate having him on.
Yeah, and some critical nuggets there. I did not know that Larry Ellison was the largest ever donor to the Friends of the IDF. I knew he was bad on a number of points, but that's a hell of a twist to the TikTok story, I'll tell you. Like that is valuable. I will not forget that. That is one I want to repeat.
I also had no idea about, like the whole just being appointed a lord and then collecting a paycheck forever.
Oh yeah, no, that's you're created a lord. We don't have a lot of time to get into it, but it used to be that it was based on the hereditary monarchy, but now they just create them, and so it's like a political fill-up. And so, like as Loki was saying, people switch parties or they take certain positions, and then you're rewarded with a peerage, is what they're called, a peerage. But most of them now are fake. Although a number of the people in there are hereditary lords that go back like hundreds of years, which gives you sort of a sense of how bizarre it is there. And the mother of all parliaments, as they call it there in the United Kingdom. So yeah, it's a wild situation, as it were. But yes, something interesting and important, I think, to continue to watch how this sort of information warfare issue is going on. And we are also not immune from that, by the way. I will say at Breakthrough News, Jerusalem Post, many others have been attacking us recently, as being we're everything all at once. You know, we're agents of Russia, of China, of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of Cuba, of Venezuela,
We bring them all
of, you know,
together.
the
We're the glue,
Martians.
some might
Yeah,
say.
all at one time. I I think the Jerusalem Post said that they were shocked at our massive growth. I wish I had the exact quote in front of us.
Explosive growth.
Explosive growth. But
Yeah.
we're seeing more and more of that, you know, and I think that's a very good point that Loki makes about what's really behind that, in an attempt to shift the narrative about what's going
Yeah.
on, which is obvious. It's a genocide. There's no doubt about that
Yeah,
whatsoever.
people are just mad about genocide. It's really simple, actually.
It is very simple. It is very simple. Well, we want to turn our attention now to another issue, critically important issue coming up very soon. On May 29th, South Africa will go to the polls 20 years after the first democratic elections in 1994, a watershed in world history when South Africans went to vote after they had defeated apartheid after a multi-century struggle against various colonial forces. And they will be at the polls again 20 years later, a number of critically important issues at stake, both inside the country and also relevant to South Africa's role in the world. So we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Phakamile Lubi-Mujola, who is the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, South Africa's largest trade union. Pax, as always, thanks so much for being here with us.
Good evening. I'm so happy to be on your show. I love watching your show. I was totally fascinated by the conversation you guys just had with Loki. First of all, I'm a huge fan. I've been following his work, not just as a musician and an artist, but also as an activist. He is a brilliant thinker of our time and of our generation. And I'm not surprised about this information warfare. And I really think we should have a conversation about that, because he's not the only person who's been targeted with these dodgy reports about Russian bots. Some of us have also been targeted. And it just shows you that clearly the enemy has identified that the work that we're doing in terms of providing alternative platforms and real information about what's really happening to the majority, which is the working class in all over the globe, is having an impact. And I think that's how we should see it.
No, I think that's very, very true. Sorry, Ronnie, go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I'm glad you actually started that way, because I think this is an interesting element of the South African elections. I know you all in NUMSA, who just had a very comprehensive statement about the elections, have pointed to that I feel a lot of people don't know. It's certainly something talked about around the world, but the rise of right-wing parties and right-wing forces. And I think that's an interesting aspect of what's happening in South Africa during these elections, when, of course, the world is looking at South Africa around Palestine in particular, around Cuba, other issues, as playing sort of a vanguard role in pushing back against, the genocide and the attempts to strangle these countries. So I was hoping you could actually just talk a little bit about that, because we haven't heard much, I think, in the West as it concerns the elections there and what's happening in terms of the political landscape.
Oh, absolutely. South Africa has been a major focus, especially geopolitically, because of the positions that we've taken, because we have been very clear that what's happening in Palestine is a genocide. We're very clear that Israel is an apartheid state. NUMSA's position, in fact, is that the people of Palestine have the right to resist. And because of our history with a brutal apartheid force, which was also attempting to subjugate and eliminate the black population here, we completely understand the fact that Palestinians have the right to resist by any means necessary. I absolutely love what your co-host said to Piers Morgan the other day when he asked her, that stupid question that he always asks, do you condemn Hamas? And she said, I absolutely loved how she characterized it. Thank you so much, my sister, because you were right on point to say that I will support anyone who murders their slave masters. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not even a question. So, the fact that South Africa has taken this position has created a situation where we are now a focal point geopolitically, and there's a lot of pressure on us in terms of our foreign policy position. And we've seen, very, very directed attacks at the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Naledi Pandor, with regards to the position that South Africa has taken on the ICJ. So NUMSA is very aware of the geopolitics and what that means for us. But more than anything, we are also obviously aware of the conditions affecting workers on a day-to-day basis in this country. We're aware that the 1994 transition from apartheid to so-called democracy did not give us economic power. It was a political transformation in only. The wealth of the country remains in the hands of the mostly white minority. Yes, there are some wealthy black billionaires, but the point is that by far the majority of people who own the economy in this country are white. And so the majority of black people still have not tasted the fruits of democracy. They are locked out from, quality healthcare. They're locked out from quality education. They still live in informal settlements and subhuman living standards. And we've said that these are conditions that this ANC government has created through neoliberalism and by its refusal to genuinely transform the economy. But having said that, we've also noted that there is this, we can almost say like consolidation of right-wing parties like the Democratic Alliance, which is the current official opposition in South Africa. Parties like the Democratic Alliance, parties like Action SA, Build One South Africa, Patriotic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, ACDP. These are all organizations that have a lot of funding from the very same people who control the South African economy, who want the economy to remain the way it is. They get funding. And these are the same people, by the way, who drive a very, very particular agenda from a geopolitical perspective, which is, to defend Israel, to defend Ukraine, to pretend that this is simply a war between Ukraine and Russia and not a NATO-sponsored war. And they want to interfere in our elections. They want to interfere in our politics. But the worst out of the bunch that I've just mentioned is the Democratic Alliance. Not just in terms of their foreign policy outlook, which is very much pro-Israel, but also because they are completely anti-black and anti-working class. When you look at their manifesto, it's really about, taking us back to where we were before 1994, before workers were able to secure many, many rights and protections that we've had to fight for over the last 30 years. And as a union, we've taken a position to say these right-wing organizations, we're warning you workers, do not vote for these right-wing organizations. You will deepen your suffering. That is the position of the union.
I love that in this basically statement by NUMSA, there's like a whole very clear section. I just love the way it's worded. NUMSA identifies the following political parties as the worst, which the working class must not vote for, and they are, and you name them. And of course, Democratic Alliance is at the top. I'm curious if you can give us an idea, is there a base of popularity for these parties? Because the fact that some of them, obviously being economically right-wing in a time when people are living in poverty, it can be easy to slice some people off and convince them that, right-wing economics is the right way to go using, hate and xenophobia. But South Africa is so staunchly anti-Israel and pro-Palestine and anti-Zionist that is there a strong base of a support for a party that is so pro-Israel, parties, I should say, that are so pro-Israel, and also, like you said, pro-NATO, I guess my question is, do these parties have a chance of actually winning in a place like South Africa?
So our challenge is that the traditional media, which represents and over-amplifies the voices of the neoliberal elite, the very same people who control the South African economy, is the one that's really giving a lot of these small organizations more oxygen than they deserve. Certainly giving the DA a lot more oxygen and attention than it deserves. And I think it has to be said, the fact that the South African working class is frustrated has a lot to do with the fact that the ANC has failed. The ANC had an opportunity to take a radical position in 1994 and drive an agenda for the working class. If it had done that, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be in a situation where this trade union has to do a list and basically, list the organizations that are a problem. Because this is, I'm going to use a South African expression. South Africans are heartful with the ANC. Heartful means we are extremely, extremely angry, tired, frustrated because of, extreme corruption, unemployment, but more importantly, the fact that they've not utilized their power in a meaningful way to transform the lives of the majority of people, thus giving space to the emergence of these right-wing organizations. And I think this is a phenomenon that's not unique to South Africa. If you look in different parts of the world, you are seeing, right-wing elements rising because neoliberalism has failed to deliver the kind of genuine transformation and democracy that most people expect. I mean, you will hear liberals talk about how democracy is this fantastic concept, but what they leave out is that those democratic, principles that are supposed to be for all of us are actually only enjoyed by very few, by very, very few, very, very, very wealthy people. And that's the, sort of the small print in liberal ideology that you only learn once you've implemented the policies and you realize, oh my gosh, what a mistake you've made. And I think this is the crisis that we're in South Africa, is that sadly the ANC made a wrong choice politically and economically and has created this situation. As a trade union, we do think it is our responsibility to raise the levels of consciousness. We're a trade union that was not afraid to launch a socialist party at a time when it was not popular to do so. In 2019, we participated in elections through the SRWP and tried to advance a socialist agenda. Unfortunately, we did not win over the majority of the working class. But that does not mean we are now going to keep quiet in the year of what is possibly the most crucial elections since 1994. We feel that we have a very, very responsibility to warn the working class about the possibilities that can happen if they vote for any of the right-wing organizations that we mentioned on that list.
Well, I'm glad you ended on that last point, because I'm curious your thoughts in a general sense of what this says about the state of the class struggle, because in a way, it's an interesting commentary when you look at the elections from my point of view, that, no matter how sort of opportunistic or hollow it may be, when you look at a lot of the parties, especially the ANC, but also, EFF, PAC, AZAPO, a lot of people, MK, the way they're appealing for votes is, we're going to give you the land, we're going to have universal health care, we're going to do this, which seems to me to at least speak to the fact that the consciousness of the masses seems to be at a very significant level, and that offers some hope, both inside and outside elections, because even those who are looking to grandstand feel like they have to appeal, to this more progressive consciousness in order to gain any support.
I think that is one of the positive things of this election, is that you have seen a much stronger voice of progressive organizations like the ones you've mentioned, EFF, AZAPO, PAC. You're hearing the voices of the left emerging, which I think is a very positive step. And in fact, what I would like to see, and now this is me speaking in my own personal capacity when I say this, I would like to see a scenario post-1994 where the left unites, because we can see that the right-wingers are consolidating power. And the reason they're consolidating power is because there is a real fear amongst the neoliberal elitist minority in this country that South Africa is shifting more left. When they see the foreign policy decisions of somebody like the brave Dr. Naledi Pandor on the position on Palestine, and the neutral position adopted by South Africa, as they correctly should have, on the issue of Ukraine and Russia, it concerns them greatly, because in their view, South Africa is supposed to be a mouthpiece of the G8, of the neoliberal agenda. That is what they thought they were creating. And when they see these sort of ructions, this sort of shift, and of course, the rise of these, very, very organizations like the EFF and others that are really making a big noise about alternatives and alternative political systems, it scares them. It scares them because they don't want South Africa to create any possibility that socialism could exist. Because if that happens, or if there's any sort of progressive shift to the left, then there is a fear that the rest of the continent will catch the same flu or the same bug, and then it will extend. So I think this is a really important time for South Africa. I think it's really important that we must be honest with voters. And I think it's good that organizations like NUMSA are coming out clearly to say, here's some right wingers, stay away from them, look elsewhere if you're looking for a political organization, because we've also said that we're not going to dictate to our members who they should vote for, but it's very important for us to make sure that they understand and can identify those organizations that are going to deepen the suffering of workers and their families.
Phakamile Hlubi Majola, the national spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, as always, doing it for the love of the working class, and we really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side.
I love being on the show, and thank you so much for having me. And you guys just carry on being you, hey? You rock. This is why they're scared of you. This is why they are running for their hills. They sound crazy. It's fine. It means you're doing the right thing. So just keep it up. Love you.
Right on. Thank you so much.
All right.
Well, that's so sweet. And she's so wonderful. Always love having her on. And, I think that's a really good point she made at the end, in the sense that, if you're getting attacked the way that a lot of us around the world are right now, it means you're doing something right, because you are scaring a disgusting, horrible system that will go out of its way, even looking like a circus, to try to, destroy any challenge to it.
Yes, no, 100%. Also want to shout out Sam Ali for your donation there in the chat. But yeah, May 29th, very interesting to see. It's if you don't know, you have to look closely. In Congress, there's been several attempts to sanction South Africa over multiple different pieces, to remove them from AGOA, which is basically like a shadow sanction, essentially. So there, and actually, there's also some talk in Congress, if after the elections, of renewing this push to potentially sanction the country because of what they're doing on Palestine, what they're doing on Cuba, also other countries around the world, what they've done in the war in Ukraine. It's really amazing. But yeah, South Africa is a worldwide pivot, not just on the continent, but around the world, obviously carrying the moral authority of the anti-apartheid struggle. So they're very concerned. So that's a front to keep watching. But, we are going to move the story forward here, and we want to continue the ongoing conversation we've been having here on the show as it concerns the intersection of, so-called free speech, the fight for solidarity with Palestine, how that's all playing out from the point of view of American college campuses and higher education. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi, who is the founding director and senior scholar of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies program at San Francisco State University, and also the head of the Oral History Project, teaching Palestine. Dr. Abdulhadi, thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we are very happy to have you with us. And, just to start out, something that happened I think it was last week or maybe a week and a half ago, Dr. Ilan Pappé, who is the Israeli anti-Zionist academic, was stopped in the airport in Detroit by Homeland Security. They were, interrogating him on all these different things, his views on Hamas. But, as someone who yourself has experienced this sort of harassment many times before, I was hoping you could actually talk about how the U.S. security state is going after people for their political views on Palestine.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I know myself, I have experience being stopped at U.S. borders. I was returning from the World Social Forum Free Palestine in Mexico City to speak at the event in Los Angeles that's for Arab and Palestinian community. And I was on my way from Houston, and I was stopped in Houston, detained for 3 hours, interrogated about my research. What's teaching Palestine? What's Ahmed studies? What are you doing? And I kept asking, you don't have the right to actually ask me all these questions. And then they insisted to take my phone. No water. I was actually on a wheelchair. I was unable to move anywhere. And I kept asking, who are you? Who are you? And then one guy started looking into my files. And then afterwards, finally, I said, you have to inform my lawyer. And they said, oh, we informed your husband. I said, but that's not, meaning you're allowed one phone call, but that's you're allowed one phone call if you get arrested. And they kept saying that I wasn't arrested, but they won't let me go. And I think part of it is to basically, and I'm used to this in going and coming back to Palestine. I mean, all the time, I've already been experiencing many times being left in a room for 2 hours naked, and then they go and they leave alone. You can't get out. Missed flights. I mean, this happens again and again and again. And the United States pretends that actually allows everybody to have freedom of speech. We know that is not the case. And we know that this is part of the intimidation. The security state is working together. It's not separate from each other. It's not separate from what Israel is doing. It's not separate from Israel lobby industries, all the apologists for Israel that are unable to save Israel from itself, from all the genocide that is conducting. So they can't cover it up. They're trying so hard to cover it up. And every time Israel fails in one of its strategies, they actually make things up the ante, make it even worse and worse and worse. And they are very much connected with the securitized industries. And we know that, especially post 9/11, 2001, but not only, before that as well, they were actually a lot of collaboration, but it escalated post 9/11, 2001. And now we know, I teach at San Francisco State University, Silicon Valley is around the corner. We know that there is a lot of securitized industries. We know that many of them are actually engaged in spying on Palestinians, facial recognition. This is how they're capturing protesters and so on. So this is one aspect of it, the way they're doing it. But why are they doing it? Because there are material interests involved in this. We're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars. And the students, actually the student activists and all the activists are saying, we want to stop all these military weapons, because we don't want it to go and participate, our tax dollars, to participate in genocide in Palestinians. Secondly, is because actually the money is better used in order to improve the roads, improve the healthcare, even have a healthcare, housing, education. I mean, students can't even go to school with the tuition and so on. So all of them coming together, basically really to intimidate us, to shut us down, because the more we are active, exactly as you said, as your guest from NUMSA, whom I love, said, and Loki before, I was able to hear a little bit. This is the thing is that we won't shut up. So they up the ante. They actually escalate the repression from every single aspect of it. So they make it impossible. They try to make it. They think they can make it impossible. But we know people's movements have never been stopped. You continue. There is a large cause, and it is a large cause. But there is interest that are very much connected with the Israeli. In the Israel, it's been said multiple times that Israel needs a war at least every 5 years in order for them to display their weapons and say tested in battle and sell them. Because there is also in the arms industry, there is competition, and this, quote unquote, it's a market. Doesn't have an invisible hand. It's all structured, and there is connection between each other. But this is what's going on. So there is all of this stuff. And I think I don't separate what's happening at the borders from Department of Homeland Security, ICE, from the FBI spying on people, from the police department, whether you're talking about UCLA, the attack on the students, and the police came actually and shot. But why are we surprised? LA Police Department has historically been repressing people, and there is a very big movement there to stop Cop City. In New York, the mayor of the city of New York actually has his own director of intelligence and counterterrorism, an Israeli woman who's actually even an adjunct professor at Columbia University. And they are the ones who worked together with Columbia University to attack and arrest hundreds of students. And Columbia until now has not really investigated the skunk water that has been thrown at some of the students, and some of them still have injuries. So we see all of this stuff coming together. And I think big part of it also is that the balance of forces is shifting. It is in a place that is no longer than the powers that be can actually claim that they have control over everything. They are. I'm not saying that we are in a place where it is equal. We're not. But I'm saying that there is something that's changing. that's shifting, that's threatening them. And they saw what happened in the 60s in the US, at least. They saw what happens around the world. They saw what happens with the Palestinian intifadas, with the resistance that's going on in Gaza and so on. They see what's happening with people. And you've already mentioned, and I think your guests have mentioned, Cuba, you've mentioned Venezuela, you've mentioned many places, South Africa, many places where when people rise up in anti-colonial movements and anti-racist movement to liberate themselves for freedom, they are the powers that we want to crush them, because it's either us or them. I mean, this is the way they're seeing it. They're not willing to do even reforms. So they would like, this is very, very big that's going on today.
Well, Rabab, I appreciate you putting that in the context of this very large and growing movement that we've seen across the country. And then, of course, the sort of very organized Zionist attacks that go from the security apparatus to the lobbying groups on college campuses. I want to ask you about something a bit closer to home, though, because you've been the target as well of these attempts over the last several years. Well, actually, it's your entire professional life you've been attacked by Zionists. So not just the last several years, but in particular, I'm talking about what you've been dealing with San Francisco State University having canceled its only Palestine course, Palestine Ethnic Studies Perspective, which was scheduled to be taught by you, but was canceled for the second time, I believe. Can you tell us about this course and who's behind that campaign? I'm sure it's many of the same forces that we see behind the repression of student protests across the country.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So first, let me talk about the things that I love, which is teaching, and this course is very, very exciting to teach. It's exciting to teach, and it's also very attractive to students, very popular, not only because of the material in it, but also it fulfills multiple general education requirements. So we get students from across university, from various colleges who study science, engineering, biology, environment, anything, humanities, they come and take the course. I used to offer it only once a year, but now there is much more interest. So last semester in the fall, they canceled it, and they would not give us any reason why they would cancel it. No reason. Until now, we don't have a reason why they cancel it. And they talk about all sorts of technicalities, that there needs to have this course and that course. And we know it's all technical. And we know there is weaponization of the bureaucracy in order to also shut us down, which is also happening with the student movement and so on. They'll come up with time, place, and manner and so on. All of these are tactics to figure out how do you crush with people. Some people call it soft power. I don't know what's the difference between soft power and hard power when you are at the receiving end, right? So my course, I teach the history of Palestine. I talk about over 100 years of resistance. I teach about the Zionist movement and its emergence and its connection with the capitalists and anti-Semites in Europe as well. I teach about the various Palestinian stages from the 36 movement, 36-39, the 48 Nakba, the emergence of the Palestinian student movements in various places, the Palestinian movement itself, liberation in 48, in exile in Beirut, in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and so on. And then I go into like the 60s, which is a very important period. We talk about the Intifada in 87. We talk about the Aqsa Intifada. We talk about the relationship between Arab countries and Palestine. I mean, we cover everything, and we actually bring it up to the present. And this semester, I really pushed, and I wasn't the only one. I pushed my students, our community, everybody. We made a huge campaign, so they were forced to allow the class because this semester in the spring. And they were saying it will have low enrollment. And I said, it has never had low enrollment. This class has always been popular. And I said, okay, so call my bluff, offer the course, and let's see if it's low enrollment, cancel it. So I don't have a space in any of my classes this semester. The classes are full. I mean, you imagine how much grading this is. So now I also said, right, I'm constantly grading because I give a lot of assignments, but my students are really excited about it. So this summer, they said, I would like to teach 2 courses in the summer, which I've been teaching historically, 2 courses in the summer. And I would like to teach Introduction to Ahmed Studies and Palestine. And because also students are so interested that you have to teach it every semester. And we actually need to teach several sections of it because of the rising. And they always call about student demand. So I'm saying, okay, student demand. There is a student demand. Respond to that. Even if you want to present it in marketable ways, like the market and so on, dollars and cents, because this is the money all goes to the university. We don't get a penny from the student tuition, and they charge tuition a lot. So they wrote actually to me formally, the dean and the associate dean, that these are the courses, and they signed it together. Then when I'm going through different arbitrations with the university because of the various violations and the veto and our success and the violent veto by the university. Anyway, in the end, one of the arbitration, the university lawyers came up with the list of my courses and actually showed me the 2 summer courses, and they said, these are your courses. It is an official document, legal document they submitted to the arbitrator, to the legal court. So we went back to the dean and said, this is what's going on. So who's lying? Is the dean lying? Is the people, the lawyers from the top lawyers? This is top lawyers from California State University, not just SFSU. They will know. And then they said, oh, this is what we need. I said, who needs that? We have a lot of students who need advanced courses, 600 level courses. There is so much interest. There are so many people, as you know, we do a lot of open classrooms. So my only understanding of what's going on is because we've been targeted. Ahmed Studies has been targeted. They would really like to dismantle the program, close it down, because it is just a centered knowledge production program. We are not neutral in the production of knowledge. We do a very, very creative pedagogies. We bring speakers, as you know. We do all sorts of things in the classroom that students don't fall asleep. I mean, nobody sits down in their class looking at their phones, or students are really mesmerized and they want more and more and more. And they are very active in this. So I think part of it is, of course, the Zionist pressure, because we know the university is very much based on something called donor-driven contributions. So instead of actually the university saying, this is what we need a center for this, and we go to the donors. Now the donors are saying, this is what we would like to create. So donors came and told the university they would like to create Israeli studies, endowed lines. And they have. Even though we created the Edward Said Scholarship, with the collaboration with the Edward Said family and so on, they have prevented, we only were able to award it once. So they stopped that. They would like to stop the courses that were, every single time I teach any course, they always send public record requests. All the right-wing groups, Campus Reform, the Zionists, and so on, they try to destroy the agreement we have with An-Najah National University. Campus Watch did a petition of 5,000 people they said, this is terrorist universities. I'm indoctrinating students in terrorism. And they called An-Najah and Bir Zaid Palestinian terrorists. Why? In order to divert attention from the fact that education in Palestine is under attack. That this is something that is not okay. The minute they start saying terrorism, everything shifts. And this is what they're doing today. When they accuse us of anti-Semitism and terrorism, they shift the whole equation. So now I think this is what's happening, is that, they would really like to push me out. They would like me to go. They've tried multiple times. As you know, we spoke about this before. They came up with multiple settlements. As long as I actually sign a paper saying I have no grievances, there is no discrimination at this university, and I give up on the Ahmed Studies program, they will be happy to give me, at one point, they offered $750,000, whatever. And I said, no, I'm not for sale. And our program is not for sale. And Palestine is not for sale. This is something that's really important. And it's necessary. So now what they're doing, instead of actually fighting for something, they're shutting down. Basically, they're not making it possible for the students to learn. So we already launched a campaign demanding that the class be reinstated. My colleagues from the Asian community in particular, because we have the dean and the provost are both Asian, from the Asian community, asked them, we're embarrassed of you. You need to actually fix this. But we know that there are bigger powers at play, that the Zionists would like to really shut down any possibilities. And this is institutionalized. This is part of the curriculum. So they shut it down. Of course they are. They're attacking us in all sorts of ways. But shutting down the class itself makes it impossible for the students to learn and have it on their syllabus. And it also undermines the Ahmed Studies program. So students wouldn't want to, if they are seen that they're going to be participant or accused of material support for terrorism. Of course, everybody would be afraid of that. That's a very serious charge.
Very important issues, very important points, and the struggle certainly continues at San Francisco State and all around the world. Dr. Rabab Abdul-Hadi, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Rania?
She's such a warrior.
Yeah,
Such a warrior. She's been on the front lines for so long of this fight, and just to see her energy makes me feel like I need to be doing more.
Yes,
because
and at a critical
Dr. Rabab Abdul-Hadi
place.
has been in this struggle for a long time. She's a queen.
Yeah, well, and very much in the lineage, San Francisco State, perfect place of obviously the historic Third World Student Strike, 1967, 1968. Look that up. But one of the vanguard campuses for struggles for liberation here in the United States. Well, we want to turn our attention now to the island of Cuba and some intersections with how some of the worst people in terms of U.S. policy on Cuba have been caught. A little bit on their own horns here, but we're going to get into all of that. We are very happy to be joined on the show by Liz Olivia Fernandez, who's an award-winning Cuban journalist with Belly of the Beast. Liz, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Well, great to have you here. And, I know that you all have done some work on Senator Bob Menendez, who is now in quite a bit of trouble, or potentially here in the United States, for corruption. And that's probably how most people know his name. But he's also been really one of the lead people in promoting the blockade and various other punitive policies against Cuba. So tell us something about Bob Menendez and his relationship to Cuba, which I think a lot of people maybe know less about than his continuous and frequent corruption cases.
Well, the first thing, he is Cuban. His parents are Cuban. So he feels really close in the political discourse he has about Cuba, U.S. Policy on Cuba. He is one of the main characters inside of the Biden administration who is pushing for maintaining the sanctions against my country. And the curious things about both Menendez and Cuba is he has never put his foot in Cuba. So he said that he knows Cuba very well, but he's never been here.
Wow. I wouldn't have expected that from such a stand-up, honest guy. Well, so you have these two documentaries that you worked on. You and I got to talk about one of them in an episode of Unauthorized Disclosure, which I co-hosted with Kevin Gastola, who's also going to be on the show today. And that was Hardliner on the Hudson, which I believe has now out. We talked to you before it was out to view, right? But now is up on the Belly of the Beach YouTube channel. Go check it out. Where you talk a lot about Bob Menendez as well as some other figures, these kind of like anti-Cuba Cuban American politicians in the US. And then you also have this other documentary called Uphill on the Hill. So I'm curious, can you talk to us? First, let's start with Hardliner on the Hudson. Talk to us about that documentary and tell people why they need to go watch it, because it's full of a lot of really important information and interactions that you had when you actually came to the US for the first time and got to speak to some of these people for yourself.
I think that the first things that call the attention of the people when it's called about the new documentaries the Belly of the Beast has, Uphill on the Hill and also Hardline and the Hudson, is we are doing a kind of parachute journalist the other way around. Parachute journalist people is when a journalist from the Western Hemisphere is coming to the global South and trying to explain the things the way they see it, and the most of the time it's a colonialist point of view. And this time we are doing the same. We're taking my own experience as a Cuban journalist, going to the United States and trying to do, first, journalists, and two, trying to discover what is behind the U.S. policy against my country and what have been maintained that policy for almost 60 years now. So that's the whole thing. That's my whole story. And that's a quite amazing experience for me. Because as a Cuban journalist who have going to the country of the free of fish, as they love to call U.S., it was really quite interesting for me to have the conversation with politicians and see how open they are to having like a true and honest conversation with a journalist that is critical to the policy that they maintain against my country.
I'm curious in some ways, what are some of the takeaways you had from talking to these politicians and maybe even just coming to the United States in terms of, the sort of messaging that is given by the U.S. government about, what is really happening here versus the reality?
Well, it's funny. The takeaway, wow. I think that my biggest takeaway is not with for politicians, is with the people of the United States. I think like in some point, if you watch the documentary, you realize I get really frustrated. Try to go to the State Department, to the Congress, and inside by the administration, try to talk to the people, because I realize they know about the Cuba situation. They know that the Sanchez is not hurting the government. The Sanchez is hurting the Cuban people. I always knew about that. But they are not pretty open to pay the price to talk about Cuba, because Cuba is a really polarized topic. You were talking about Palestine, Gaza. Gaza is a really polarized topic in the United States. Cuba always been a really polarized topic in the United States. In fact, Cuban American love it, learn from APAC love it. So I would like to say in some point the student became a master, because right now you can talk about U.S. election without talking about Cuba and Florida and what is going on about Biden policy in Cuba. He's going to maintain Trump policy. He's going to come back to Obama era. It's a really polarized topic, because even when you know what's going on, you can talk positive about Cuba without backlash. It's impossible. If you want to talk about Cuba, you need to point in the first, okay, regime, dictatorship, blah, 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 the things in they have been repeating for decades right now. But you can talk just positive about Cuba. You can celebrate healthcare, Cuba education system. You can celebrate access to education and everything. So without putting the force human rights abuses and everything. We at this point we know that they don't care about human rights abuses or nothing, because they don't know how putting sanctions against a country are helping to improve human rights abuses in any other country in the world. Don't talk about the relationship that that U.S. has with Israel, the relationship that U.S. had with Saudi Arabia. So they care or they don't care about human rights abuses. But on the other hand, I really was touched by Washington D.C. people and the big understanding that they have about U.S. policy, not just in Cuba, but in Latin America in general, and also the empathy that they feel about how this policy is hurting to the people, and the concessions and the definitions that they have for sanctions. I was really frozen when someone I was asking to in the interviews on the streets of Washington D.C. U.S. street, talking to Black people that look like me about my country, because U.S. Congress is pretty white. I just stopped with the guy that say sanctions is violence. I know, said, who is these people? Who are they? What they know so well about Cuba? They're not getting that information in US media for sure. So how is it possible that they know, they understand the policy and the effects of the policy in a country, and US politicians don't, or they seems like they don't? In my opinion, it's because Black people in the US has been suffering, and they know by experience what the US government is capable to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, and it's a really good point, but I also wanted to ask you about Biden, because, so much was made about Biden being the lesser of evil. And, now we're watching him unleash and support this genocide in Gaza, really the worst case scenario. And also Biden, on top of being a horrific overseer of genocide in Gaza, has actually increased sanctions on Cuba, which I think, I don't know if it came to as a shock to a lot of people, but I think because he was vice president under Obama, who normalized with Cuba, it took some people maybe a little bit by surprise that he carried on with Trump's undoing of that normalization and actually became even more hawkish on Cuba. So I'm curious if during your time in the US, perhaps you already understood before, what's your take on why Biden has embraced Trump's policies on Cuba and then continued to accelerate the US aggression against Cuba?
Well, that's a really good question that I want to ask to Biden myself, because I don't care neither. Because even his wife was in Cuba during the Obama visit, so he knows. Some people say he is a cautious politician. Some people say that he's waiting his next term, if there is one. In my opinion, I don't know what's going on. Of course, we know that Senator Bob Menendez was a really big piece inside of Biden administration and his relation. He's pushing for his policy on Cuba, Trump policy, Biden policy. Because when we talk about U.S. policy on Cuba, they don't have a party. It's like Republican, and also there are Democrats pushing hard for maintaining the sanctions against my country. But with Biden, I don't know. The justification that they always are like the less of the evil, what does it mean? What does it mean? Like sometimes I just watching news and they are talking about elections and the importance of the young people vote these elections and vote for Biden, support Democrats. And I say, what's going on? In the worst scenario, what's going on if people go by their own opinion, by their own gods? Okay, I feel that this person can make a change. Maybe that person I need to ask about what do you think about U.S. Policy on Cuba? Because it's really difficult to try to find the less evil between Democrats and Republicans when it's talk about Cuba, Gaza, Palestine. Because what does it mean for us? What does it mean for people who has been marginalized for both party our entire life, our entire existence? I'm talking about the sanctions on Cuba are not new. My mom was born under the sanctions. I was born under the sanctions. If the children of my friends are born under the sanctions, and if I have a child in the near future, is also going to born under the sanctions. So what does it mean, the least evil for me? Where I don't want to trying to, okay, the less evil in the United States means the less evil for Cuban people, because I just want to have a country with a policy and with our problems that can fix inside of Cuba. That doesn't depend of U.S. elections of the less evil that you vote in the next elections in the United States, because that's too far away from us. We need a change, and we need to change now.
Very, very good points, and I hope everyone who's watching here goes to Belly of the Beast and checks out Hardliner on the Hudson and all the other great pieces you all have been doing. We really appreciate your work, Liz. Liz Olivia Fernandez, award-winning Cuban journalist with Belly of the Beast. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
It was a pleasure.
Rania?
I really, Liz is fantastic, and she's also just like really good interacting with people. I recommend people go check out these documentaries. It's also just cool. I love the idea, the general idea of like somebody from a global South country who is high on the target list of U.S. imperialism, getting to come to the U.S. for once, and that person be the lens through which you watch global North country get understood. Love it.
No, I think so. I think it's critically important. And I think, the point she was making there at the end is it's, you have to think about the victims of the policies, not just sort of your own subjective understanding of it, when we're talking about lesser of two evils, this, that, and the third, in a real serious way, I think, in terms of people's moral compass. But yeah, unbelievable. And I thought the point she made was very poignant. Her mom, born under sanctions. This has to be the most ridiculous. Well, I don't know. There's so many ridiculous policies, but it's one of the most ridiculous policies. I think we had the video up on our social media. People can see of this idiot, which one of them it is, the spokesperson of the State Department. They're all idiots, but one of them, trying to explain how Cuba was cooperating with America on anti-terrorism investigations, but was still on the list of state sponsors of terror. And it was just so like through the looking glass, Alice in Wonderland, the way he was trying to describe it. It just showed, I don't know, on every level. Just go and you can see it there on our social media. But in a way, a good segue to go from a journalist to continue talking about journalism in and of itself, of course, with another journalist. And this is the case of Julian Assange, where there was another ruling on Monday, and we'll get into what all it means and where it could be going. And we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show here by Kevin Gostela, who's the curator of thedissenter.org and also the co-host of the podcast Unauthorized Disclosure. As always, Kevin, thank you so much for being with us.
Hello. It's good to join you.
Well, great to have you here.
Returning the finger point that Rania was doing.
Yeah, I did this thing thing where I did like a thing with my fingers and Kevin did it back to me. I have no idea how well you can see me right now, so maybe you missed it, but that was really funny. Thank you, Kevin, for reciprocating.
I'm here to play along.
Sort of a 1950s moment there from Rania. Nonetheless, Kevin, on Monday, I think it was Monday, hopefully I'm not wrong, there was a ruling in the Assange case vis-a-vis his extradition. About other appeals, I think sometimes it can be a little confusing what all of this means in terms of where things stand. So if you could just explain what the ruling was and where Julian Assange's case on extradition to the United States stands because of this ruling.
I'll take a step back, and I always want to begin with the broader picture and then drill down to the specific details. And what always must be stated is at any moment, President Joe Biden, his administration, Attorney General Merrick Garland, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is actually somewhat involved in this extradition because they've made diplomatic representations to the UK Foreign Office about how they will handle Julian Assange. At any time, they could drop the charges and end this case, as a close ally, Australia, has demanded. And that isn't just through some politicians or parliamentarians in Australia, but it is from a resolution that was passed by the parliament, by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese himself, who has requested that a resolution to this case be found and that Julian Assange not be put on trial by the United States, that he be set free from Belmarsh, where he has been in prison for over 5 years now, and that he be allowed to return to his home in Australia. Since that is not a choice that the Biden administration is willing to make, despite the calls from civil liberties, human rights, press freedom organizations, law professors, parliamentarians from numerous countries around the world, Global South, European, etc. We are here, and there was a extradition hearing in proceedings before the British High Court of Justice on Monday, on May 20th, and they heard, based on these particular assurances that were offered, they heard arguments around these. They're basically promises that were put to the High Court. And we've already in this case seen some assurances accepted. I won't rehash what happened there. But basically, there was an assurance that was put forward about Julian Assange not being exposed to the death penalty. That was accepted because it is within the power of the executive branch to not sentence someone to death after they are extradited. His legal team took it at face value, as they are required to do, and they believe that Julian Assange won't have the death penalty imposed against him. Now, they objected to the assurance that was given, which isn't really an assurance when it comes to the issue of the First Amendment. Julian Assange would like to be able to claim when he gets to the United States and is in a U.S. courtroom that he has First Amendment rights, that basically, if he had been an American, he would not be facing this prosecution. And since he's being prosecuted under a U.S. law, he should have First Amendment protections, which should require the withdrawal and an end to the Espionage Act case that is being brought against him. The U.S. has said that they don't think Julian Assange has First Amendment rights because he is a foreign national. And by that, there is an evidence that he would be prejudiced due to his nationality if he's put on trial. And that's something the High Court of Justice took very seriously. And in hearing some of the arguments that were put forward, after consideration, they came back and granted Julian Assange an appeal hearing. And what's the first positive decision in a long time for Julian Assange? I mean, it's hard to know what victory looks like when you're Julian Assange and you have to sit in indefinite detention in a facility that's known as Britain's Guantanamo. But this is something that Assange supporters and his legal team, and even I think Assange himself, are celebrating because it's the first opening in a while for blocking this extradition request.
So I'm curious, Kevin, this is positive news, obviously, but moving forward, what are the chances another appeal works? Because it just seems like at this point, there's either, like, we've been having the same conversation about Julian Assange since he was very viciously taken out of the Ecuadorian embassy by British authorities. So now we're talking about years of just ongoing trials and appeals and a lot of legalese that many people don't understand. And it's just become normal now. It's like, oh, there's a new ruling about Assange. Oh my God, he might be extradited. Oh my God, he might not be. Also, he's like slowly rotting away in prison. And then there's this happening in the backdrop of really a horrible hawkish, I don't want to say shift, but trajectory in US politics, where whether it's a Democrat or Republican in charge, it really seems like the neocons have taken over on a bipartisan level. And, whether it's Joe Biden continuing what the Trump administration started with Julian Assange, what the Obama administration wasn't doing, whether he continues that into a second administration, or whether Donald Trump becomes elected again and continues doing what Donald Trump was already doing. Yeah, I'm just curious your general thoughts on all those things I just threw out. How positive is this news? What's to expect next? And what can we expect of the impact of this hawkish trajectory of US politics?
So specifically, I mean, the hawkish trend in US politics is probably why Julian Assange was indicted in the first place. I think we can attribute it to that neoconservative element. It was Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, then Bill Barr as Attorney General, and Mike Pompeo, this reptilian kind of a creature that took over the CIA and then the State Department, and his Christian Reconstructionism, as well as his attitude of neoconservatism towards the world that really said he was going to go to war against WikiLeaks and target Julian Assange while he was in the Ecuador embassy. But specifically, I do think we need to acknowledge and give ourselves permission to see this as a moment, a rare opportunity to halt a extradition and prevent a U.S. trial that, if you believe all the scholars, if you believe all the experts, if you believe all the people who warned against pursuing this prosecution, this is the time to stop this case. There will be no, after Julian Assange has this appeal hearing, if the High Court doesn't block this extradition, he can go to the European Court of Human Rights, but we don't really know how long that will take to resolve. We don't really know if they will take up his petition because they only ever hear a handful of those to review. So you want it blocked in the UK courts. You want the US government to feel that they are being defeated because their extradition request is deficient. And if there's going to be any face saving, that they do something with Assange and Australia and US officials to negotiate some kind of an end to this, maybe a plea deal. And that is probably the best outcome. Otherwise, what we are watching is a slow death because it's going to take a long time before the European Court of Human Rights. It means probably 2 or 3 more years at least before we have a resolution. And Julian Assange may not have that kind of time in Belmarsh prison. And so the hawkishness, that backdrop, I've said before, and I'll say it again, that the questions that people have, the skepticism, the way they think that the U.S. doesn't really care about freedom of the press because they have allowed or they have pushed for the jailing of a journalist is connected and intertwined with all of the actions that are happening in Gaza and Israel at this moment. And we know that the U.S. can dictate what global press freedom looks like. They were able to get the Associated Press back their media equipment after it was seized by Israel. That only happens because they put pressure. They could stop the targeting of journalists in Gaza, but they don't care if those people are being killed by the Israeli military. They could take steps to force the Israeli government to allow international journalists into Gaza to report on what's happening in the ground. But they won't do that because they're happy with the status quo. They could do more to stop the banning of Al Jazeera from Israel. They could do more to speak out against the media censorship that is now affecting more organizations than Al Jazeera. But they are okay with the status quo. They're not doing anything that they don't want to do to support press freedom and democracy. And they're not doing any more than they have to do to support press freedom and democracy in this case, which is to say that they aren't supporting it at all, that they are trampling upon it by prosecuting Julian Assange and acting like he is an exception to the rule. And I'll just close by reading an actual statement that was shared with the court by the prosecutor representing the U.S. government's interests. And he said, "No one, neither U.S. citizens nor foreign citizens, are entitled to rely on the First Amendment in relation to the publication of illegally obtained national defense information," and so on and so forth. And so what that means for people who aren't lawyers, what it means for you and me who care about access to the truth, is that it doesn't make a difference whether it's Assange or it's someone at the New York Times or it's people at Breakthrough News or it's me running a Substack newsletter. If I get documents and I publish it and try to challenge powerful elites in Washington, D.C., and they want to come after me and put me in prison, then I'm going to suffer the same fate as Julian Assange.
No, I mean, I think, that's a critically important point on every level. I mean, the slippery slope element of this, which I think, they'll obviously do this if this happens to Julian Assange, which I think is, critical and important. Well, you already mentioned it, and I just want to sort of touch on it real quick before we end here. It does seem like Australia is moving, apace here. The prime minister is talking about it. I mean, do you think that or what do we know? Perhaps I know you're not in the minds of the Australian and U.S. people, but does this seem like this in and of itself is a little bit of a sea change? They were quiet for a number of years, but now seem to be increasingly pressing on this issue.
I always try to represent the nuance, and there are competing perspectives. Stella Assange, understandably, the legal team for Julian Assange, they celebrate this as the kind of support that they've always been demanding from Julian Assange's home country, and they finally have it. And they're using this to try and muster more support and to build further pressure on the U.S. government to free Julian Assange. There are Assange campaigners that have been working tirelessly for the last 5+ years, even beyond that. I mean, when he was in the Ecuador embassy, I think they were lobbying the Australia government as well. But then there is a recognition always that the Australia government could do more. I mean, they're a client state. They're a close ally of the United States government. The U.S. government, for its empire, is relying on Australia to counter China's influence in the Asia-Pacific region. And so I think there's an understanding among Assange campaigners and other people who are pushing for Julian Assange's support that they could really get under the skin of Joe Biden and the White House and others in his administration by denying cooperation or putting stipulations down that basically, if you don't free Julian Assange, we are not going to work with you on this issue or that issue. And so thus far, they have been unwilling to do anything to try and force Biden to free Julian Assange. But it could reach that point. It's Australia, unlike the United Kingdom and the United States, has a clear majority of people who are engaged with Julian Assange's case and who believe that he should be free. And they have a pretty good understanding of the issues. And I'm not just saying that because that's my perception. There was actually a poll that I found remarkable that was done by Morning Consult, which showed just how ignorant people are in the UK and the United States on Julian Assange's case. But in his home country, they do actually understand the issues. And that is why Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is advocating on Julian Assange's behalf. It didn't happen because they care about Julian Assange. Pressure from the ground up led to this advocacy and support of one of their own. And so I do think ultimately ending Julian Assange's prosecution, it will hinge upon the fact that Australia now is such a thorn in the side of the US demanding an end to this prosecution.
Well, as always, we really appreciate you, Kevin, helping us sort through all of this. This was Kevin Gostela, if you just tuned in, who is the curator of the Dissenter.org newsletter and also the co-host of the podcast, Unauthorized Disclosure. Thanks for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side, Kevin.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, God, the U.S. does so many bad things around the world, Eugene. I know we're not done with the show yet, but we've literally gone around the world so far.
Yeah. We have gone around the world.
Not one of the places we've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, it really is
something good.
Yes. Well, yes. It's definitely good to have at least one, positive thing sort of come out in the context of this. I mean, obviously, I think Kevin's point that they could just drop the case is a key point that, needs to be stated again and again and again, because this is really it's not like they can't get out of this, but the United States has become so vindictive on Assange, on Cuba, on Israel too. Talking about pre-October 7th, on the Abraham Accords. We've seen the Biden administration really break. Not that the Obama administration was great, but break from the precedent of Obama, which I think a lot of people didn't expect. But I think it does speak to Joe Biden's, sort of core conservatism, the role he's always played since, 1973 when he entered the United States Senate. And I think that's something that people really need to understand, that his entire political career, he has sort of been the bridge between the right wing and the sort of center-left Democratic leadership, trying to steer the country in a way that is more reactionary. Of course, he was a key figure in the war on drugs and the rise of mass incarceration. He was a key figure in preventing Anita Hill's testimony from coming forward and thus bringing Clarence Thomas onto the Supreme Court. He was a key figure, obviously, in preventing, for many, many years, Democrats codifying a woman's right to choose. It's amazing to hear him say, if you elect us, we're going to actually pass this law. Hopefully someone will pass the law eventually, but he was one of the main people arguing against this for many years. He was a major supporter of the Iraq War. And let's not forget, when he ran for president in 2008, he actually was campaigning on a program of dismembering Iraq and turning it into 3 separate countries. So, real sort of Lawrence of Arabia, Sykes-Picot type situation here. But nonetheless, this has been consistent in terms of his advocacy over the years, that this is his role, is that he is sort of a firewall within the Democratic Party to try to prevent, not even like that progressive causes, but just sort of like common sense, you might actually argue, from actually ruling the day as it concerns, what's happening in the politics of the country. So I think it's true to form, but it really is unbelievable. It's incredibly dangerous. Of course, every day, every newspaper in America is using all these anonymous sources, illegal, whatever things that they shouldn't be knowing. And so ultimately, a lot of that is designed. The government uses access journalism to control a lot of these institutions. And, when they're not using access journalism, they're just controlling the journalist anyway. But that's a whole nother story here, the role of the CIA in terms of the U.S. media. But the point being is they can then pick and choose who they want to go after. And, some people will be favored and some people will be targeted. And it'll basically be a gentle person's agreement. Glenn Greenwald actually once did something on this many years ago. I can't remember where it was, but he was highlighting how like the NPR national security reporter had stood up in a public forum and was saying how it was actually their duty to do what the intelligence agencies told them to do. I wish I could remember the exact thing, but she was openly saying it, that it was an important view of patriotism. So you can see how they'll trade not only access as they do now, but the potential for prosecution to control the impact of what gets out, how it gets out. And the impact of WikiLeaks was the exact opposite of that. And I think that's, of course, why Julian Assange was targeted. It's also, by the way, why this so-called international consortium of investigative journalists that released the Panama Papers or whatever was created, to create a fake, U.S. European intelligence agency version of WikiLeaks, where, you can't search the database. They pick and choose the journalists they give the information to, but designed to create the perception that there is, this open field here. So that's also a part of the broader attacks on the sort of WikiLeaks style of journalism. But anyway, let me not get too long-winded.
Well, I know all those points are very, very well put. And just to what you were saying about Joe Biden, it also brings us to what he's doing right now. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but he still manages to surprise me. Like, I didn't have on my bingo card Joe Biden saying he'll back Republican efforts to sanction the ICC.
Yeah.
Like, did I think Biden was going to be on board with an ICC, like, potential arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant? No, I mean, I didn't think Biden would support that. But the idea of sanctioning the institution itself and the officials in it, which is what Republicans have been threatening to do, for him to then go and say, yeah, sure, I'll get behind it. It's just like, I think it was Muin Rabbani tweeted yesterday or the day before that Joe Biden is a card-carrying Kahanist at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it really does seem like that. I mean, I think Joe Biden has actually said before that he is a supporter of Likud. I might be wrong about that, but I feel like he said something to that effect before. I don't know. He's very close to Netanyahu.
Honest. I mean, he is.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the whole thing. He's like, I know him so well. Bibi and I go way back. All these other, sort of elements there that are questionable in many different regards. So it's a terrible situation. It really is frustrating to see, but I think we have to understand that in the context of what happened. And again, I just think people cannot believe what these people say. I mean, they're saying if you bring back the Democrats, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. But I mean, let's just go to the past two administrations. First 2 years of Joe Biden, they have White House, Senate, House. They didn't pass the PRO Act to help the unions, couldn't pass Build Back Better, so on and so forth. First 2 years of Obama, they have all of them. Don't pass the Employee Free Choice Act to help workers on the job. Don't have even a public option. Forget universal health care. I mean, on multiple occasions, all the things they promise, they end up not actually doing when they have control of all three houses. Then Republicans win the next thing, and then it just becomes a sort of steadily downhill, compromises that ultimately end up just cutting more and more from social programs. Like, people have to wake up to the reality. Like, you can say all day long, well, what about Trump? And what about this? And what about that? But again, put that aside. Just look at the last two times the Democrats had control of the White House and both houses of Congress. Did they or did they not carry out the election program they said they were going to carry out when Obama and then subsequently Biden ran? Did they do it or did they not do it? Just go look it up. You will find they did not do it. And in fact, not only did they not do it, the people who sunk it were themselves Democrats. In Obama's first two terms, it was people like Joe Lieberman. And Biden's term, it was people like Joe Manchin. Like, you cannot trust these people to do what they say they're going to do. So the whole idea of lesser of two evil politics, which has so many other problems that we've talked about quite a bit here on this show, that I had a long conversation with Brian Becker on the Socials program a couple weeks ago. You can check that out on our YouTube page, Breakthrough News. Just put that aside, all the other arguments. Just straight up, they don't do what they say they're going to do. So how can you possibly say this is definitely going to be better than X, Y, and Z when you don't even know if they're going to do the things they promise you, even if they have control? So anyway, long-winded thing, but let's leave that where it is for now. We want to continue the show here. Just a couple weeks ago, I believe it was May 13th, was the anniversary. 39 years, I believe it's been, since the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia, when the government of Philadelphia dropped a bomb on the MOVE community. And to talk more about the legacy of this action and where we are today in commemorating it, we are very honored to be joined here by Mike Africa Jr., who is the legacy director for the MOVE organization. Mike, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys having me. I know you guys got a lot of people on the schedule, and I'm honored to be here today.
Well, listen, we're happy to have you, and no problem making time for you. This is a critically important story in our historical memory. We cannot forget it. For those who are watching, maybe who have never heard of the MOVE bombing and are maybe like, what? The Philadelphia police dropped a bomb on people in their own community. Can you tell us a little bit what took place there in May of 1985 when a bomb was dropped on the MOVE community?
Well, MOVE is much like a lot of militant organizations. MOVE is like the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam. MOVE has a reputation for being very aggressive when challenged and against the religious beliefs. So the city of Philadelphia had a mayor by the name of Frank Rizzo, who was a very militaristic type police commissioner before that, and then even more militaristic mayor for Philadelphia. And on May 13th, 1985, the city of Philadelphia, or actually in 1983, the citizens of Philadelphia wanted Rizzo gone. So they elected this very democratic black mayor named Wilson Good. But all of the police, or most of the police, were still Rizzo's police. And MOVE was a thorn in the side of the city of Philadelphia. And the city's idea of getting rid of this thorn was to drop a bomb. So that's what they did. And they killed a lot of people in that bombing that ignited a fire that, sparked a blaze that took out a community.
And, when we talk about obviously that moment in history that hasn't received the attention it deserves or any justice, I'm curious, how do you relate it to, I guess, the ongoing repression of movements by the security apparatus till this day? Because I think that was a bit of a watershed moment in terms of what the country was willing to do. I mean, obviously, the U.S. has always been willing to do horrific things to any liberation movements, but to actually bomb a neighborhood, it was unprecedented. What impact did that have in terms of, chilling activism?
I think people still haven't really waken up to what's really needed to be done to eliminate things like that from happening. Right now, we're watching what's happening in Palestine. We're watching what's happening around the world in Haiti. We're seeing what's going on in Africa. And these are not things that just started, they're ongoing. I think the news media does a really good job of disarming people with things like protest, but protest peacefully. When Mike Brown was shot in the head, he had bullet holes in the top of his head. When he was killed, the police rose up and they were willing to protect Darren Williams at all costs. They supported him and they gave him whatever he needed. And if anybody tried to hurt a hair on his head, they would have had to deal with the police department. But when it comes to citizens that's been killed the same way, we're told to protest peacefully. We can march, we can protest, but make sure we have a permit. The same rules don't apply for the citizens. They say that the police are there to serve and protect the community, but that's not the truth. And so I think that people haven't waken up to the reality that you can't take advice from your enemy and expect to get anywhere. And all of these politicians that get up there and run for office every 4 years, that cry and plead for your votes, what do? They do what they have to do, and they say what they have to say to get elected, and then they do what they want to do once they're in that position. So, I think people, really need to take a look at what's happening with this Genocide Joe character that said that he was going to make sure he look out for the African American community, and he was going to make sure that he deal with the student loan issue, and he owed the people. What did he say? The crime bill. That's my name is on these bills, and he said that I owe you. I won't forget you. And right now, no, he hasn't forgotten. He's just saying a big FU to the people. So, I think that we need to learn how to do for self and stop waiting for these politicians to give us anything. Obviously, they ain't giving us nothing.
No, and I think I'm glad you made the point about the propaganda of how they demonize people, the way the mainstream media is distorting things, whether we're talking about Gaza or whatever it may be, Mike Brown, the uprising in Ferguson, because this was the same context with MOVE. I mean, this was so much both before and after the attempt to sanitize this by spreading, a huge number of lies and misconceptions to try to get people not to support MOVE. So I was hoping you could talk about that as well.
Yeah, MOVE has a very controversial history because of its practices. In 1970s, dreadlocks were not popular. They're popular now, but back then, I can assure you they were not. Raw food diet. There's Tabitha Brown is doing her thing. You got raw food restaurants all over the country and outside the country. But if you told somebody that you was eating raw potatoes and raw sweet potatoes in 1980 something, yeah, they looked at you like you were crazy. A lot of things that MOVE got really demonized for are popular things now, but back then, we were called nasty, we were called dirty. Don't even not look, we caught discrimination from every angle, from white people, from black people, even our family members that didn't agree with the way that Move lived. And I didn't necessarily. I grew up in Move. I was born in Move. I was born in a jail cell after a raid took my parents to prison. So I didn't like everything about Move either. But I tell you what, I had a whole lot less issues with Move than bulldozers knocking our house down and bombs blowing our roof up. Right. The demonization is what the city used to win the opinion of the people, so that if the people support what's happening to people, the issues that's happening, then the news media and the government can get away with what they're doing. And that's why they put out those accusations that Move is crazy, so that they can justify it to the people and they can get away with it. And that's exactly what they did.
And since then, I mean, what have there been attempts at getting justice, at holding anyone accountable? If so, what have those attempts yielded, if anything? What has it been like to try to get somebody to answer for what was a criminal act?
Right now, I'm wearing a hat that says Reclaim Osage, because the city of Philadelphia, after they bombed our house, they took it from our family through eminent domain. My great aunt Louise James Africa owned the house outright, and the city bombed it, killed her son in the house, killed her brother in the house, and killed all those other Move people in the house. They took the house through eminent domain, even though they continued to send her electric bills and water bills, even though they sent her a bill for destroying the house. And in 1995, she filed a civil suit against the city of Philadelphia for doing what they did. And the city of Philadelphia was on trial, along with the mayor who dropped the bomb, and millions of dollars for being burned by coffee. The children that were burned by fire, that was burning 2,000 degrees, that was hot enough to melt steel. Their families was given the option to take $1 a week. And then it got worse than that. Once the jury made their decision, the judge on the case decided that $1 a week was too stiff a punishment. So he granted all three of the perpetrators immunity. And then, to make matters worse than that, my great aunt Louise James Africa, when she was trying to get her house back, her dying wish was to get her house back in 2019. Gentrification swept through Philadelphia, and the Osage neighborhood was part of that gentrification process. The houses were then sold to a developer for $1. I called the developer, told him that I wanted to get the house back for my aunt. He said, "We're not giving you the house back because your last name is Africa." The developer got the house. He sold it for $300,000. The home owner then wanted to sell the house to me because he didn't know what the house represented. And now, of course, that homeowner has seen the gentrification wave, so he wants full market value and what he paid for it, which pushed us over $400,000 to buy our house back.
Wow. I mean, some of this you don't even really know what to say. Let me ask you this. In terms of, here we are almost 40 years later. I think a lot of people watching this who haven't heard are probably equally feeling shocked. What can they do to support the efforts to, continue not only to commemorate the legacy, but, repair the harms to the extent it can be done in the aftermath?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I appreciate you asking it. We always talk about reparations. That's a very popular topic right now. But what I know about reparations is we've never been given anything. Everything that we've gotten, we've had to fight for it. Black people didn't get chains off of our wrists because the white people that kept us in captivity thought it was a good idea when we suggested it. We had to fight for it. We had to work for it. We had to die for it. Reparations is something that we're going to have to give ourselves. And so Reclaim Osage is about giving back reparations to us and us doing something despite their resistance to us having our house back. People can we're asking for donations. We have a GoFundMe. You can go to my website, www.mikeafricajr.com. The website, the GoFundMe is on there, and we're appreciative of every donation that comes in.
Well, Mike, I really appreciate you joining us. I mean, this is critically important that we keep talking about this and keep remembering what took place and keep moving forward to reclaim what can be reclaimed and move forward for a better future. Mike Africa Jr.,
definitely.
Legacy Director of the MOVE organization. Thank you for some of your
Most
time
def.
here on the Freedom
Thank
Side.
you.
Appreciate you.
Okay, so we really did go around the world. We even came back to the US.
We did.
Still, I've heard nothing in this program about anything good the US has done because there's just nothing we can. We looked.
Yeah.
We looked. It's actually insane. It's actually they bombed their own city.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy, and you don't learn about that. By the way, I had no idea from the education I got in one of the most well-funded public school systems in the country. Apparently, they didn't teach us about the MOVE bombing. There's a lot they don't teach us about.
No, I mean that's definitely hidden history. I also want to mention Mami Abu Jamal, of course, is affiliated with the MOVE organization as well, and that history we've covered on this show significantly, so you can see the long arm of repression there. But yeah, terrible situation. Unbelievable piece. There's a new book out, I know, by D. Watkins, I think Mike Africa Jr. worked on. There's the film, Let the Fire Burn. You just look into it. You should look into it because your mind will be blown by what took place there. And it was Mike mentioned it. They actually said let the fire burn. It burned down a whole block. Even people not even affiliated. So they were trying to not only eliminate MOVE, but send a message to anybody else who would dare to sort of step out of line in that context. And the sort of fascistic policing history of Philadelphia really just wild on so many different levels. But we really appreciate Mike for being willing to come on, and everyone really who was willing to come on, all our guests, everyone who donated. And so certainly everyone who is here as a viewer watching. Rania, before we go today, are there other things you feel our viewers need to know?
Yes, I want to. Actually, I don't think we told our viewers or explained, we know that we usually do this on Thursday, and today is in fact Wednesday.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think there's a good, we should say why. There's the Palestine conference in Detroit.
Yeah, the People's Conference on Palestine in Detroit. I'll actually be speaking on a panel about media, which will be on Saturday at 1 p.m. if you want to live stream it. I don't know exactly how you do that, sorry. But People's Conference for Palestine, I'm sure you'll figure it out one way or the other.
Actually, you can watch the live stream through Breakthrough News because Breakthrough News is the official streamer of the People's Conference.
Oh, well, there you go.
So for that reason, we had to do the live stream, the Freedom Side, a day earlier this week so we could get our team in place to bring you the amazing speeches, including by our very own Eugene per year at the conference, the People's Conference for Palestine in Detroit. But for those of you who support endeavors such as that, I mean, that is going to cost us some money. So you can also donate to that for that reason. But also, I'm going to end the show the way I started it, Eugene, and remind people to go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and become members of Breakthrough News to help support our independent media project here so we can keep bringing you the journalism that we've been bringing you, but hopefully at a growing scale, because it's more important than ever that we have independent media outlets that aren't in the pockets of the people who own literally everything else.
Yes, that is 100% true, and we appreciate everyone who's viewing, everyone who's a patron. All your support is big. But talking about independent news, I also just want to shout out everyone watching on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate y'all, and we really appreciate a whole team there at Free Speech TV putting us on your television. Potentially millions of people. I'm just going to go with millions of people. But big shout out to the whole team there at FSTV, and we're very happy to have people watching us there as well. Really, really appreciate y'all for supporting us in any medium that you may choose. So that'll do it for us here today. For myself, for Rania, for our whole team here at Breakthrough News, we will see you next time.